1941, Reza Shah Pahlavi, while under pressure from Britain and the Soviet Union, was forced to give up the throne for his son, Mohammad Reza Shah. This ended his 16-year reign as leader of Iran. From 1941 to 1946, the Allied powers occupied Iran. Those 5 years were a time of struggle for Iranian people, and when Anglo-Soviet forces left in 1946, Iranians felt they had regained their independence. A new leader did not bring order to Iran. Many political groups rose up to challenge the Shah. While many others were killed, the Shah narrowly escaped assassination. The US and Britain supported the Shah because they could manipulate him and control the oil industry in Iran. In 1951, the Shah appointed Mohammad Mossadegh, a popular Western-educated liberal, as prime minister.
Mossadegh was a favorite of the masses, and he was interested in promoting the good of the people.
Mossadegh wanted to nationalize the oil industry so the profits could be invested in government services to improve the lives of ordinary Iranians. Britain and the US objected, and in 1953 they removed Mossadegh from power in a CIA-backed coup d'etat. Over the next 24 years, the US continued to support the Shah as he consolidated his power into a brutal police state. By the late 1970s, the Iranian people wanted to overthrow the Shah, and in October 1977, Islamic groups began to protest. This was the start of the Iranian Revolution. As the revolution gained momentum, the Shah's power decreased. In October 1978, he allowed the exiled Islamic leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, to return to the country. By 1979, the Shah had become very ill, and in January he agreed to leave Iran to seek treatment. In February, the Islamic revolutionaries took over the government. After jumping from country to country, the Shah was finally admitted by the US in October.
The admission of the Shah to the United States was a very, very difficult decision for the president. There's no question that every human instinct led us to want to be as helpful as we could to a man who was sick, especially somebody who had been a good friend. And yet we knew that this would create a tremendous reaction, negative reaction in Iran.
Iranians were furious that the Shah had left the country. On November 4th, fierce protests against the U.S. led to Iranian students taking over the U.S. embassy, holding 52 people hostage. The U.S. government was caught completely off guard.
We had no idea who these people were, who their leaders were. Obviously, when the mob began to come in contact with the people who came out of what was an embassy that was beginning to burn, they were blindfolded, so we had no idea who the people were.
The Ayatollah Khomeini supported the takeover. He was in no hurry to send help to the embassy.
Many people felt that the crisis could have been avoided if the Iranian government had reacted faster.
Whether the government could have prevented this, I think, leads to a much larger question. It's not whether they could have prevented it, but whether they wanted to prevent it. And I think by that time, the answer is probably not.
As Iranians claimed victory, Americans searched for answers.
What we saw, of course, very quickly were the people blindfolded, hands tied, and so on. It was not a hopeful picture from our point of view.
People were not used to seeing American officials blindfolded on TV. The government felt a lot of pressure to resolve the crisis quickly. The U.S. government had dealt with crises in the past, and they knew how to respond.
The people responsible for that particular area of the world will move into an office just off the operations center on the 7th floor of the State Department. We call these the task force rooms. You set up a crisis task force, move in, man the office round the clock, have all the special communications funneled into them, and so on. The people there, some of them spoke Farsi, the Foreign Service officers. They discovered fairly quickly, after the embassy was taken, that they could still direct dial Iran on the telephone. And many of them had served in Tehran, so they got out their old Rolodexes, so to speak, or their appointment books, and they started dialing people in the in the shops and so on that they had known.
In the 5 months after the embassy takeover, the U.S. didn't make much progress toward resolving the crisis. The Iranians refused to negotiate terms for a release.
Secretary of State was having a conversation with an eminent Islamic figure, a man from the Sudan. And this man, Sadiq al-Mahdi was his name, told Secretary Vance, "You will not get your hostages back until Khomeini, the Ayatollah Khomeini, has succeeded in putting every element of his Islamic revolution in place."
As the hostage crisis wore on with no end in sight, the call for military action became stronger.
Every morning for a long period of time, there was a meeting in the White House Situation Room of key people from across the U.S. government who were involved. And the meetings were usually chaired by the President's National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski. And after some of the meetings, you could just, as people were dispersing, going out of the Situation Room and out of the, which is in the basement of the West Wing of the White House, as we were leaving, you could see that Brzezinski was taking a couple of the military people upstairs to his office. So it didn't take a lot of intelligence to guess that they were talking about a military option.
Brzezinski persuaded Carter to authorize the rescue mission, Operation Eagle Claw.
Although the rescue mission was planned very thoroughly, most of the people in the State Department thought it was a long shot.
As Secretary of State Cyrus Vance began to gather information, his assistants began to realize what was going on.
But the questions he was asking of us, what do we know about where the hostages are exactly, et cetera, et cetera. We never, as I say, asked why he was asking the questions, because we pretty well could tell.
On April 24, 1980, the U.S. attempted Operation Eagle Claw. The mission was a complete failure. Only 5 of the 8 helicopters were functioning when they reached the first staging area in the desert. Because of this, Carter let them abort the mission. As they were leaving, one of the helicopters collided into another aircraft, creating a fire that killed 8 servicemen and injured 4 more.
The decision to go ahead with Operation Eagle Claw was made without Secretary Vance's consent, so when he heard of the failure, he handed in his resignation.
And he had opposed it, and they had made the decision when he was away. And so when he came back and learned of it, he told President Carter that he would ask Carter to accept his resignation. Whether the mission succeeded or failed, he said, I cannot be party to justifying this.
Soon after the rescue mission failed, Iranians sent a message to the U.S. saying that they were willing to negotiate. This was, as Saunders says in his book, the beginning of the end.
We got a secret message through a German channel signed by the son of Ayatollah Khomeini, the Speaker of the House, the new president, the new prime minister. And the message, and I'm paraphrasing now, was in effect, the Imam Khomeini is gravely ill. We want to settle the hostage crisis. Ultimately, the Iranians appointed the Algerians to be the intermediary. Algeria was an Islamic country. They had a revolution against France, so they had good revolutionary credentials, good Islamic credentials. And the Algerians said yes. They made 3 trips, 2 trips to the United States. We made 2 trips to Algeria, working sequentially on the drafts of a possible agreement.
On January 20th, 1981, all 52 of the hostages were freed by Iran. They arrived in the U.S. on the same day as Ronald Reagan's inauguration. This brought a lot of joy to the American people.